Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien sitting in for Paul Harvey this morning on Friday, February 18th, 2022. Stand by for the rest of the story. Well, Mr. Paul Harvey up there, if you're with the boss and you can listen to this, and my wife up there, I'm doing a special rest of the story today, since it's the weekend of the president, so I'm doing it on Abraham Lincoln, in the way you would. And I hope you meet with this, and I hope if somebody listens to this and know Paul Harvey Jr., they would pass along, because I need his comments on this one too. Well, Americans, it's President's Day again on Monday, February 21st, and the History Channel is doing a 3-day special on Abraham Lincoln. I'm going to watch it to see how they did it. Now, Abraham Lincoln is very special to me because he is the one human being on this planet that actually knew what was going on, but he didn't know what to do about it. And he tried the heck to do the best he could with what he had at the time. And you must remember, this is the mid-19th century. And stop looking at this with your 21st century eyes. Especially if you're African Americans and whites and everybody else with your racist and supremacy and all the... Stop looking at that. It was a crucial point in your history, and you guys missed it, even today. And Abraham Lincoln knew that you were going to miss it, as he told you in his numerous addresses and stuff. Abraham Lincoln was not a Republican, he was not an abolitionist, and he was never anti-slavery. Okay? Abraham Lincoln was a self-made man. And Mr. Paul Harvey, you did a restore of the story on him when he was the barkeep, remember? And he went to the judge because he started a partnership with this other guy for a bar. And the judge told him he had to pay the first time. And he got him on the second time, too. And do you remember, as you said in that story, Mr. Harvey, back in the 1960s, 100 years after Abraham Lincoln's death, you said that Mr. Lincoln looked at that second loss, or he had to pay anyway, so he paid coming and he paid going, and he wanted to know about the law, to figure out what in the law made him lose, why the law looked at him the way he did. And that was the Abraham Lincoln that I know, the law guy. The guy that knew you had to have a certain thing, and that's what he was trying to get you Americans to do during the Civil War and the days after the Civil War ended. Because it didn't end with the Appomattox surrender of Lee versus Grant. You still had skirmishes for a little while, and you still had sympathizers for about a decade that wanted the war, kept it going. Okay, so you don't understand that. And you still had the South, who wanted to be like they were. They called themselves the Redeemers. And it cost you big time, 100 years worth of disaster because of all the things that went on here. But Abraham Lincoln, after that little law incident where his partner and the bar, he had to pay all the debts for the bar too. Can you imagine him? He got left, as you would say, holding the bag. So he was determined to find out what in the law gave him the right to give him this. And if you look at his debates with William A. Douglas in 1858 during the Senate race, those debates more or less explains Lincoln the man. Especially when he said, "A house divided cannot stand." And unlucky for Mr. Lincoln, and if you hear me up there, President Lincoln, with the boss, the United States has always been a house divided. It's even more fragmented today than when you were alive. They don't understand it. You tried to explain it to them. But no other president since you has picked up the mantle and say, Mr. Lincoln wanted to do this, this, and that. The Republicans, out of spite, gave the African Americans every right they wanted, but stiffed them because they didn't want to integrate them into the society. Neither did the South. So the African Americans ended up being a group with nothing. And then the little backroom deal that they did in 1876 made them even worse for another 100 years. And 100 years after you died, President Lincoln, they did another civil rights thing under President Johnson. Yeah, there was another President Johnson 100 years after you appointed Mr. Johnson your vice president, and he became president. And the two Johnsons were kind of similar there. But if you hear me, President Lincoln, they never understood who you were. When you did what you had to do during war, and I know it must have pained for you because they had a story about, and Mr. Harvey, you did a story on Lincoln again for September 1862 when he was pondering the Emancipation Proclamation. And Mr. Lincoln, you understood the difference between proclamations and executive orders. And you know what they meant. In a proclamation, you can do a lot more than an executive order. You should have told that to your successor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who in 1942 put Executive Order 9066 out there. You would have never done that because you knew better. He was in a war just like you were in a war. You were in a war for your country's survival. He was in a war for political survival, not just people's survival. If the Nazis won, they would be a cleansing you've never seen on this planet before if they would have won, wouldn't they? Would they have gotten the cleansing they want? No. Did they ever get the cleansing they wanted with the Jews? No. And you see what I mean, Mr. Lincoln? All your words that you said in your time came to fruition. And the Americans and the humans of this planet have never understood them. Isn't that terrible? You were a man that when you did that Emancipation Proclamation, you knew it had no stick to it, had no bite to it. It was something that you wanted the people to think about. There was no such thing as freeing the slaves. It's like it's people comparing that to saying, okay, Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation saved the slaves. Really? Did the British and the French declaring war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939, did that save any Polish people? Really? Because they were at war because they were honoring the Polish alliance that they had to come to Poland's aid. They never came to no aid of Poland. They ended up fighting for their own survival. That is a way of thinking that you tried to avoid, President Lincoln. On your inaugural address of 1864 and 1865, when you became president again in March, people don't look at that inaugural address and see what you were trying to tell the people, that you have to have a prime directive, that you have to figure out how to coexist. They don't have figured out your Gettysburg Address of 1863. And that was after a devastating Gettysburg, July 1 through July 4th, 1863. And don't forget Antietam in 1862. That's why you wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. They forget about Antietam. A month after that, you were pondering because you saw a devastation. And at the time, your North was losing the war. And a lot of people today and historians say that you did that just to bring the African Americans and the slavery issue into the war and, how would you say, galvanize the North. The North was never galvanized by your Emancipation Proclamation. The South took exception for it, but they didn't understand what a proclamation is. A lot of presidents have done proclamations. Hey, they do National Hot Dog Day proclamations, don't they? Or a National Somebody Day, National Someone Else Day today. A lot of presidents do that. Mr. Biden's done almost 100 of them, and it's a year over in the office. Proclamate this, proclamate that. But those executive orders, Ronald Reagan did a whole bunch. Mr. Trump, oh man, did he do a terrible ones? Yeah. And Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the one known famous for 9066. And then you have Mr. Gerald R. Ford, who withdrew 9066. He didn't throw it up and say, we can't use that anymore. 9066 can come back again. All he did is rescinded it. And President Lincoln, you have been trying since, even on your deathbed, now that you're dead, with your works and your papers, and people like Paul Harvey, you have been trying to get the Americans to understand your point of view, and none of them have ever understood your point of view. You needed a prime directive. You needed to take both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution preamble and throw it on the Americans' face and said, this is what we have to do, and we have failed miserably at it. And for that, President Lincoln, if you're up there with the boss and my wife, if I had a hat on, I would take my hat off and put it on my heart and say, thank you. Sitting in for Paul Harvey today, this is your favorite alien. Good day.